Thank you so much for making the time, Jayasree, and welcome everyone to the First Draft Club 17. This is our last session. Hope you get the most out of it. We have a prolific writer and translator with us today, Jayasree Kalathil. And we also have Shalini Vineet. She is an author from our community, from the HWR community. And Jayashree, Shalini will be taking your interview today. So before we start, I'll just quickly introduce Shalini to you guys. Yeah, and then Shalini, it will be over to you. So Shalini Vineet is a fiction and freelance writer based in Bangalore. She worked for 10 years as an engineer before turning to full-time writing in December 2018. Since then, she has published 5 books. She won the Orange Flower Award for Humor in 2023. Her short story collection, Everyday People, was the finalist in the Amazon Pen to Publish contest 2019. And she has won the She short story contests in 2019 and 2020. So, Shalini, over to you.
Hi, thank you, Jessica. A very good evening to all of you, and hi, Jayasree. So I will quickly start with introducing Jayasree to the audience. So Dr. Jayasree Kalathil is the author of the children's book The Sackcloth Man, which has been translated into Malayalam, Telugu, and Hindi. As a translator, she has won the JCB Prize for Literature for S. Harish's Moustache in 2020, the Crossword Book Award for Indian Language Translation for N. Prabhakaran's Diary of a Malayali Madman in 2019, and V. Abdullah Memorial Translation Award for Sheila Tommy's Valli in 2023. Valli was also shortlisted for the 2023 National Translation Award from the American Literary Translators Association, the 2022 JCB Prize for Literature, the Arta Galata BLF Book Prize 2022, and the Green Lit Fest Honor Books Award 2023. So Jayasree, it's our pride and privilege to interview you today. So I am from Kerala, Wayanad. So I've been telling everyone here that I hail from the place where Valli came from. So Sheila Tommy is from Manandwadi and I'm from Sultan Batteri. So yeah, we share a very close bond, and I have read Valli in both in Malayalam and in English. So it's such a pleasure to be talking to you. So
thank you.
Yeah. So shall we go ahead with our questions?
Yes.
So Jayasree, so this is our first question for you. I think everyone is wondering here. So you're a very prolific writer and have written children's books, academic papers, and 6 translations in the past 5 years, if I'm not mistaken. So we are keen to learn how a typical writing day looks for you. Like, we would love to have some tips on how to be a productive writer. So how is your writing day?
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Shalini. And I'm really sorry about the scramble this morning and losing some time. Yes, I think 2 things in that. One, you wanted to know about my writing life or what a writing day looks like. But before addressing that, I want to sort of look at the question of what productive means. So for me, as a writer, productivity is not just about producing books or publishing books. Productivity is about, I'm not even quite sure if that is a term that I use that often. For me, sometimes as writers, we might struggle with one sentence or a paragraph. And if you persevere and you get that sentence just right, I think that is a productive day for me. So it is not really in the number of books we publish or in the word count, because I know there are writers who set tasks of word counts per day, and that is something that as when we start out, etc., that is helpful, because that gives us a goal. And there are people who will say that today I will write 1,000 words. And especially if you're working on a larger project, that is something that can help you to have that kind of discipline or that kind of aim to work towards, etc. So in terms of my own work, I mean, I have worked in human rights around madness and anti-racism for over 25 years. And I have the academic papers, etc., that you spoke about has been written in that period of 25 years and not in the last 5 years or so. And my the Sackcloth Man was also about 12 years ago. I started off as a literary writer, or see, I was that child who always answered the question, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" with the answer, "I want to be a writer." That was the aim in life. And I think writing stories or poetry, translating doing literary translation, writing academic papers, writing blogs or articles. I just consider all of it writing. So in that sense, I have, I suppose, achieved my goal of being a writer. The first book that you spoke about, N. Prabhakaran's Diary of a Malayali Madman, which is a collection of 5 of his novellas. I actually started the work in 2014 because I was working full time as an activist and academic in mental health. So it was on and off writing. So it took 5 years to be published because I didn't even approach a publisher until 2018, but I was just doing it for my own pleasure, etc. In 2021, I retired from my work as an academic and activist. And since then, I've been working full time I said working full time, but since then, I've kind of full time reading and writing, and that's what I do now. So in that sense, I have all the time in the world. That's not something that everybody has access to, because I didn't have access to that for the last 25 years, because you have to work and you have to make a living, and it is very difficult to make a living as a writer, I find. So yeah, I mean, so productivity something that publish how many articles we write. But if productivity is about engaging your creativity as a writer, then we need to look at it differently. So that's my take on that. In terms of what my writing day looks like, I wake up really early in the morning. I've always done. I wake up around 4:30, and then I write for several hours continuously. And then usually in the afternoons, I edit what I have written and I spend time reading. So for me, reading and writing goes hand in hand. I mean, if I'm not reading, I can't write, so I find that they are two sides of the same coin. And reading for pleasure, but I also pay a lot of attention to how people write. How people put sentences together and how they differ, how different writers differ from each other. The exquisite nature of some people's word construction, the words that they choose. I mean, so I like all of that, and I'm a bit of a geek when it comes to looking at words and meanings and sentences, etc. So that they kind of both go hand in hand together. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, of course. So it's lovely to know that, because as all of us are writers here, most of us have full-time jobs. So we always worry about this, like whether is it enough that we have written enough, or are we kind of falling behind? This has been a constant worry for everybody. But yeah, I think, as you said, it can be approached in different ways. So apart from this literary translation that's been published by traditional publishers, what are the other opportunities for a translator? Like, if you have the good skill as a translator, what can be the other opportunities? And by opportunities, I mean where you can make money also. So do you know any of other opportunities for translators, and especially at a beginner's level? I should mention this also.
Um, as a literary translator, if the aim is to become a literary translator, then of course it is, you're dealing with literature, short story, novels, poetry, whatever is the field that you like to work in. It is really through traditional public publishing in terms of a book, or of course there are magazines and journals that publish, but they usually pay very little. Especially in these days when um, magazines are not really even breaking even. So, for even, I mean, I'm just glad that people are still persevering in the magazine publication world, because, we would otherwise lose out a lot of creative storytelling and poetry, etc. Just human cultural interaction. Um, but translation skills can also be transferred to technical translation. So that might be, I mean, a lot of beginners do, um, go into that field as a kind of income generating field. So that would be sort of translating, say, legal documents, or say somebody wants a report translated for whatever purposes, etc. So there is that. I mean, I have never done that, so I don't quite know how you would go finding those opportunities. But translation as a skill can be, kind of transferred from literary translation into other fields like technical translation, I feel.
Yeah. So that brings me to my next question. So this is actually in my personal interest, because I'm a bilingual writer. I write in Malayalam as well as in English, but recently I'm writing a lot in English rather than in Malayalam. So I would really love to go back, because I've written a body of work in English now. Now I have to do the translation to Malayalam. So it's kind of a little, it's kind of reverse engineering for me, because I think in Malayalam, then write in English. Now I'm going to translate it back to Malayalam. So that the question is like, so author in English, like somebody writes in English who want to translate their own work to their regional language, their mother tongue. So what are the essential skills a writer must develop to become a translator, even if it's their own work? This is very, very, very interesting question for me. So what are the skills?
That is an interesting question. So, the Sackcloth Man, the children's book that I wrote it in English first, and I have translated it into Malayalam, Chakuprandan.
Yeah.
But having said that, I have translated it into Malayalam. It was almost like, for me at least, it was almost like rewriting it in Malayalam rather than translating. But as an author, that also, like as the author, that I have that freedom, because it's my story, and so I can write it. It's not necessarily the exact translation of the English. It's the same story that I was retelling in Malayalam this time. And that's not the same if you are working with somebody else's text, because you don't have that freedom. You are led by the text that is already in existence. So I mean, I also want to say this. There are Malayali writers, like very famous writers like O.V. Vijayan, who wrote Khasakinte Itihasam in Malayalam first, and then he himself translated that into English as The Legends of Khasak. Now, The Legends of Khasak is a good book, but it's nowhere near a good translation of the Malayalam, even though it is the author who's done the translation. So it is not necessary that a person who writes in, even though you are a bilingual writer, it's not always necessary that you write equally well the same story into different languages. You might, all of this varies. But in terms of what expertise you need, it is the same expertise that you would bring to translating someone else's text. It is the attention to the story, it is the attention to how how you choose words, how you construct the sentences, how you are led by the story and nothing else, not by the author, not by the, it is about the story. So, but as an author, you have more freedom. That you might find that something doesn't quite work in the way you want it to, so you might kind of twist it a little bit, etc. I mean, if it changes massively, you may not be able to call it a translation. It might be a new book.
Yeah.
But skills are the same. It's how you will end up working with it, I think.
Yeah. And I think also as an author, it's in my experience, like once you publish a book and get a distant yourself from the work, and then you get a better perspective of your own work when you translate into another language. Maybe you can use that perspective, or like any feedback you got or anything valid. So you can probably use that new perspective and bring it into your new work. So I think that is a added advantage.
Yeah.
So you have mentioned in the beginning of the interview that you translate work that you like as a reader. So this question is kind of related to that. So you have translated books like S. Harish Misha and N. Prabhakaran's Oru Malayali Diary and Sheila Tomi's Valli and Sandhya Mary's Maria Verum Maria. So I find I have read most of these books, and I find all these books are very, very different from each other, but yet they address some specific social and political issues like caste and mental health. So apart from like, yeah, you want to translate text that you enjoy as a reader, of course. And apart from that, what types of text actually make you invested enough so that you embark on that long journey of its translation, like creating that case for that book? So what kind of inspires you to do that? What kind of text inspires you to do that?
Yes, I mean, that's a question I get asked quite often. So there are many different criterias. I am a very political person. I'm an actively political person, invested in the issues around us. So for me, translation is not an attempt to rebuild the canon from one language to the other. So if you look at what gets translated, usually, traditionally, historically, is that the big names, the big books, the main writers from one language then gets translated into a different language. And so if you're taking Malayalam, the Malayalam literary canon, which is casteist, sexist, sort of depending on the patriarchal ways of that the society is, like all the great writers are men, that kind of thing, Savarna men, they then get translated into English. So for me, that is not the political objective of translation. For me, is a very political activity. It is a creative activity, etc., but it is a political activity. So my aim is not just to sort of then transfer that canon into a different language. I like reading books that are political in nature. So those are the type of books as a reader I enjoy, not just from Malayalam, from any language. So when I say I translate books that I like as a reader, obviously this comes into it. N. Prabhakaran's books, for me, I mean, he is actually quite a well-known and respected writer in Malayalam. But I kind of think that, especially in the short form of short stories or novellas, he is one of the best examples of how to do that for Malayalam literature. So this is why my interest. I've always been interested in his work. And of course, that first novella, Diary of a Malayali Madman or Malayali Madman and Diary, also had my political interest in how we address madness or how we represent madness in our literary cultural work. That was interesting. And this is why the rest of the 4 novellas we've added into the English translation also deal with those issues. The other book by him that I have translated is called Thiyur Chronicles, Thiyur Rekhakal, which I would call is his magnum opus, and it deals with the kind of cultural political history of Northern Kerala. And similarly, I will give you one example of when I translated Valli. Sheila Tommy was just beginning to write. It was her debut novel. Valli in Malayalam at that point was not being very well read for several reasons. One, in Kerala, even today, it is very difficult for a woman author to break ground unless you are K.R. Meera, So people don't, you don't get the same marketing as male writers. You don't get the same exposure as male writers. We have this library council book fairs through in every district of Kerala, where the publisher sends books to each of these districts. Valli was not being sent, so the Malayalam Valli. And so translation has kind of in some ways brought it back into being translated into English, and also because Valli was with all the nominations for shortlists, etc., I think it had more visibility. And that's so now people are interested in terms of, okay, who's Sheila Tommy, but what I was beginning to say is that when I chose Valli to translate, a very prominent writer translator from Kerala asked me, why are you doing this? Your job as a translator is to represent Kerala literature, and Valli should not be part of it, or Valli is not part of it. It's not important enough, etc. So I gave him the same answer, saying that how do you change how we look at what is important or not if you're just going to follow the existing canon and you're never going to ask difficult questions, but this is something that each of us as translators would, it's our investment, and our investment is very subjective. Some people may not want to do that, but I think every translator brings in some of their subjectivity into what they choose to translate. So, but the criteria for how they do it might be different.
Yeah, yeah. So thanks for translating Valli, because I am also from Wayanad, Kerala, Sultan Batheri, and the novel happens in areas where I have, like I was telling everybody, I was quite amazed by reading the novel both in Malayalam and English. And as you rightly said, I came to know about Valli only after I heard about the Valli translation in English. So I was telling all my relatives and everybody that, see, there is a novel about Wayanad, Manandavadi. Have you heard about it? So they were like, no, we haven't. So it's very true that I think publishers can actually, push or bring a book to forward or actually push it backwards. So I think Valli, the translation, has done a great job, even bringing that novel. Malayalam, I think Malayalam also has got a lot of readers, and I see a lot of book clubs in Kerala taking up Valli and discussing it, reading it, and it's a very important book to be read and discussed. So thank you for that. I'm really glad it happened. So so that so like Valli, could you share some of your favorite books or must-read translations and other books in both English and Malayalam? So you are an avid reader, so we would like to, benefit from your experience.
Okay. I read a lot of translated literature. And a lot of what I read in translation these days, I mean, it keeps changing, but these days I read a lot of Japanese and Korean translations. And Japan has quite a boom in women writers writing really kind of very offbeat type of books. And I quite like these. And one example would be Sayaka Murata, who is translated by Jeannie Takamori. That combination of Murata and Takamori, I love. All of the books she translates of Murata, I read a lot. I also read quite a bit of translations from Spanish, just from Spain, but kind of Latin America, etc. One way of sort of getting exposure to what's happening where is to, I'm sure all of you as literary translators would be already doing it, is to kind of keep an eye on or go back and look at the International Booker novel long list. it is somewhat confined in what you might find because the books have to be only the books that are published in the UK and Ireland can be nominated for the Booker Prize. But it still kind of gives you an overview of different places and different writers, etc. Maryse Condé she's a French Guadeloupean writer, translated by her husband Richard Wilcox. That's a combination that I like very much. In Kerala, in within India, just as take for example Haruki Murakami. Haruki Murakami has over 6 translators, so it's not the same person who's translating all of his books. Although we as readers assume that we are reading Murakami, but we are reading Murakami through the intervention of one of these 6 people and sometimes 2 of them in combination. And for me, I look to see who has translated it, because I tend to like Murakami books translated by Philip Gabriel more than somebody else. And so I am also led by who translates. So in that way, in India, I tend to read Srinath Perur translations. I tend to read N. Kalyanaraman translations, Arunava Sinha's translations, because these are people whose translations I really like. So it's not really chosen by the author, but it's actually chosen, I choose the books by looking at who has translated it. So that is another way of the way I go about looking at it.
Yeah. It makes sense actually when I think about it. Yeah, I have read Murakami's multiple books, but I have never paid much attention to who has translated it. Because everything was Murakami for me. Yeah, maybe as a
so there is a book actually, and the title is called What We Read When We Translate Murakami. Yeah. And this is a very interesting book because we all say we have read Murakami, but Murakami is being we as readers come to Murakami through someone else's intervention. And this book sort of looks at all his various translators and, what does it mean then for Murakami to exist in English? And also, it's not just the translators, it is what publishers decide, it is what marketing people decide, because a book becomes what it is. Now, for example, there is that very famous book that came out a couple of years ago. In India, it was called Girl in Cotton by Avni Doshi. Yeah. And in the US publication, the title of the book is Burnt Sugar. Burnt Sugar was shortlisted, I think, for one of the main awards. I can't exactly remember what it was. But the book has 2 different endings. It ends differently in the Indian version and it ends differently in the US version. And that was because the publisher and the editor insisted that the ending needed to be changed. So, there's a lot of different things happen. And that's not a translation, that's an English language book. But even then, there's a lot of other things that happens in the journey of a book from our heads and hearts into the shelf in the bookshop.
Yes. It's quite interesting to know this, because as readers we hardly get to know all these the things that happen behind the screen. So you mentioned I watched quite a few of your interviews, and you in one of your interviews you mentioned the word transcreation. I understand that you meant it in a sense that the translation is not a word by word, replacing one language to another. So, could you please tell us more about your idea of transcreation? What does it mean for you?
So I kind of feel that I would have talked about transcreation as a shortcut, or I also remember an interview where I was asked about transcreation and I have responded to that. So it's not even like I kind of in any particular way prefer the term or advocate the term or whatever, because if anything, I think a translation is co-creation between the author and the translator. Okay, but transcreation as an idea comes from Latin American literature. I cannot exactly remember the first writer to discuss it, but I will go back and look at it. Um, in essence, though, yes, translation is not about carrying words and sentences from one language to the other. That is not translation. So many other things need to happen in between. Edith Grossman, translator of Marquez and Cervantes, etc., very, she discusses it at quite length, saying that you can agonize over words and syntax in one language, trying to bring it onto the other language, but you're never going to succeed fully because words and syntax behave differently in different languages. So there's been occasions where somebody in the audience has put their hand up and asked me, saying that, how would you translate this? And give you like a word or a sentence from a writer like VKN or something. And the point that they're trying to make is that not, you can't translate this author because he's just whatever. My response is that everything is translatable. But it's not a gimmick where you give me a sentence and I'll immediately produce this perfect translation for it, because words and sentences exist in context. A word exists in the context of all the other words next to it, around it, etc. A sentence similarly with other sentences, and a paragraph similarly with, a page, etc. So it is a continuous thing, and you can try and follow. The best that a translator can do is to try and follow the resonances and the tonality and the music of an author's writer, but you can't completely find equivalents of words from one. In English there's the word snow, and there's a few other words as well, but in the Inuit language there are 16 different words to describe snow, because they live in a snowy environment and they have all the different types of snow. So words carrying words from one language to the other is not translation. Many other things happen. There are cultural meanings, there are political meanings, there's context, and then there is the author's own creativity and the way they use language, and the why they might choose this word and not that word, and why they might punctuate their sentence in this particular way, or why they might not at all. So you're paying attention to all of these things and then doing a translation.
Yeah. So this reminds me of my reading of Maria Varum Maria. So the author has a very, very distinct way of writing. Sandhya Mary's writing is very quite distinct. So I felt like some of the words like Dukli and Kundapinandi, you have just decided to leave it as it is, so that you didn't try to kind of try and struggle to find equivalent words, because Dukli is a word which Malayalis use a lot, even though we have no idea why we use it. I mean, at least me, I don't know, I used it a lot. So yeah, true. It's like as you said, it's like a lot to do with the context and to be read in a context. That's very true. So this is like my last question, my last prepared question. So you have mentioned the process of transcreation and carrying one text to another language. So is it the process differ for different forms of writing? For example, essays and poems and anthologies, and longer forms like novels and novels.
Longer forms like novels or essays allow the translator a little bit more space to work with. So if there is an expression or an idea that requires another sentence to be inserted so that it would make more sense to the reader, a novel or a essay allows you to do that. But if you're working with poetry, and if you're working with short story, and especially writers like N. Prabhakaran, whose short stories are written in such a way that there is not one unnecessary word. I mean, he's such a kind of, his prose is so refined and pared down. As a translator, you have to bring that pared downness to the English version. So you can't just, sort of say, okay, I will add half a sentence here so that the reader will understand. So so in that sense, it really depends not just what genre of writing it is also about which author it is. So you can. So take Moustache, for instance. The way Harish has written Misha is that it's an abandon of storytelling. One story goes into another, and sort of that allows your translator a bit of freedom as well to kind of be expansive in the translation. While, like I said earlier, Prabhakaran's writing does not allow that. You have to be really careful, really, really, think every word that you choose to kind of keep that tightness, that pared downness in place. When I translate poetry, I try as much as I can to even keep the form of the original. So I see a lot of translations of poetry from English to Malayalam, where a kind of really gritty writer, a really gritty poem gets translated into this Eenam and Geetham in Malayalam, and it's completely is not the same writer. The translation seems to be written by somebody else entirely because you haven't kept that. So I do try to, in both sides, like Malayalam to English or English to Malayalam, when it comes to poetry, I try and even keep the form intact as much as possible, so that allows you to then think about syllables or think about words and how they fall, the rhythm, etc., in a particular way. So it is about genre, but it is also about specific writers, and it's a combination of both that happens, I think.
Yeah. So yeah, that's when it comes to short stories in Malayalam, I think it's very true. Because most of the writers are very economical about their number of words and how come. So this is just a adding additional question. So when you translate one work from Malayalam to English, so is there any word count restriction? It has to be within that word count, or you can. Is there anything like that?
No, because like I just said, words and discussing Edith Grossman, words and sentences don't work the same from one language to the other.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not, if you're not trying to follow the word count of the original into English, because that will not be possible, because English behaves as a language very differently from Malayalam, or similarly the other way around if you're translating from English to Malayalam. However, you can try and keep to, like I said, the resonances of the authors, right? So I'll give you one example, or how the writer writes. So Harish is someone who likes to use double negatives in his sentence in Malayalam. So when I translate, I retain that double negative in my English. But as we are taught, English teachers will tell you that using double negative is wrong, grammatically wrong. Yeah. So I remember translating some of the stories in Adam where I have retained the double negatives. The copy editor came back to me and said that she had corrected all these things into standard English.
Oh.
So then I had to kind of insist that no, you retain it, because if your idea of correct English comes in, and then you kind of, if you are editing all of what you translate into standard English, Harish, Sheila, Prabhakaran, or whoever else will all read the same in English. But they are individual writers, they write differently. So their English translations should also read differently. But so the idea is not to iron out all those things. So you bring them. Or if Prabhakaran uses these very short staccato sentences in Malayalam, I try to keep that rhythm of the staccato rhythm in the English. So that's the kind of thing that you try and look at.
Yes, that's a wonderful perspective actually for everyone else to kind of pay attention to the rhythm and the tone of the original writer.
I mean, just to add to that, so if you take Valli, Valli was probably one of the easiest texts to translate for me from all the books that I've done so far. but also slightly different because Sheila is a very different writer from who I am. So Sheila is a very Sheila uses a lot of expansive language, a lot of romantic language. There's a lot of metaphors and similes, and there's descriptions of things, etc. So everything is a bit more than it is. Whereas I like things cut down. So when translating Valli, I had to stop myself from doing that because that is Sheila's style. So my job, whether I like it or not, is to bring that style into the English. So even though as a writer in me is saying, but it can be edited, it can be tightened, it can, you don't need these many adverbs or these many adjectives, but that's not your job. Your job is to also in as much as it still works in English. So there are passages in Valli which people have told both Sheila and me that they read better in English, and that's because there's a certain poetry in Valli which, even if it reads excessive in Malayalam, it kind of lends itself to be written in English. So sometimes the text gives you more room, etc.
Yeah, that's very 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 important point, I think, to note. When you especially when you translate somebody else's work. So I think, yeah, that brings me to the end of my question. And thank you so much, Jayasree, for your insights. It was such a
Thank you for your
pleasure.
questions.
Yeah, it was such a pleasure and honor. And thank you so much for translating Valli. It means a lot for us people from Wayanad. And I think now I hand over to Jessica. She
Yes.
has some questions probably from the audience. Jessica?
Yes. So thank you so much, Shalini, Jayashree. That was a very, very insightful conversation. I was actually Googling how many translators Murakami has as you were sharing them because I was like, okay, what version of Murakami have I read? So thank you. That was so insightful. Even all the other things about, writing and editing, really useful for our aspiring writers. So here's the first question from the audience for you, Jayashree. It's from L.A. Nolan. He is also a published author. So he says, I've just read Whale by Chon Mong Kwon. Please, you know, ignore my pronunciation. It's blasphemous. Translated to English by Chi Young King. I would be very interested in your options of this shortlisted Booker Prize novel. It has kept coming up in a few book clubs I attend to so many different reviews.
I must admit that Whale was one of my favorite books that I read last year. I just thoroughly enjoyed it. Different people have different opinions about it. It's a massive book. It's quite long. And it is a bonkers book, in the way the story is and in the way things happen, etc. And it took, 14 years for it to be, or 20 years for it to be translated. It was published that many years before in Korean and then got translated. I mean, what a fantastic job Chi Young Kim has done in translating that book. I mean, I'm in complete awe of her to kind of just look at that. I think for people who read a lot of translation, these types of translation, and people who are interested in translation from my perspective, these type of books give you so much more than just reading a story. So it is about, how do you translate these kind of very difficult and very kind of not straightforward books, and how well you can do it. And also how different it is from a lot of other translations that come, which are straightforward storytelling, or the storytelling that kind of makes sense between countries, etc. Whereas the Whale in its Korean original is kind of sets it apart from the general storytelling style, etc. So I think as a reader of translations, if we pay attention to what's happening more than the story itself, I think Whale was one of those books for me, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Yeah.
Yes. So, thank you so much, Jayashree. That was a very insightful conversation. I was actually Googling how many translators Murakami has as you were sharing them because I was like, okay, what version of Murakami have I read? So thank you so much for sharing that. I hope that answers your question, Nolan. Thanks, Jayashree. The next question is actually from me, because as a social media marketer, I was just curious about the effect that awards have on book titles of authors and translators. So I guess my question is that, after you won the JCB Prize, what difference did you see in your sales, or in your overall demand for writing?
Okay. There's lots to say about awards. Right. So awards definitely help everybody in the process. Okay. So, but there are awards are as different as there are different people. Yeah. So everybody talks about the JCB Prize. And I think that is for two reasons. One is that in recent years, social media is way more active and we tend to talk a lot more about reading and writing and awards, etc. on online. And it is because of the enormous cash that is attached to the JCB Prize. It is probably one of the most paid awards. But I want to take you all back to the Crossword Book Award, which has stopped now. I think Diary of a Malayali Madman was the last book that the Crossword Award existed. But it is a translation award that has been going on for the last 20 years. Every year, there is an award for an Indian language translation from 1990, whenever, till 2019. But very few people talk about it. And that's, I think, because in the early years, there was a very small amount of money attached to it. And in the later years, including Diary of a Malayali Madman, there was no cash prize. Also, in the early years, there was not as much social media, and we don't discuss that many awards. So there are other awards than JCB Prize that is actively looking to create vendor. So that what I like about the JCB Prize is that they don't make that distinction between written originally English and written, in translation. So that again supports literary translation as a creative endeavor to kind of see that they are on the same par as books written in English, etc. Does it? How does it impact on sales and demand, etc.? Oh, it has huge impact. Yes, being shortlisted or winning the JCB Prize definitely increases sales, or any other award for that matter, not just JCB. And also, it puts you. People take you. See, one of the things, as if each of us, when we are starting out, is that no one knows who we are. Like, so you send a book in, and editors may or may not look at, because they are also inundated with submissions. They may or may not look at it. But once you win an award, you can actually, it does open doors, because you can actually send in a manuscript, and no matter how busy they are, editors will at least look at it. And for authors as well. So awards definitely, and it gets people talking, whether, it doesn't matter positively or negatively, because take Moustache, for instance, it won the JCB award. I think the world of Moustache readers is divided like the world of people who like or dislike Marmite. There's those who like it, those who don't like it. There's been no in between space for it. But people talk about it, and more people talk about the books that you're doing, the more it helps everybody involved in the process. So awards do have a role to play. Yes.
All right. Thank you so much, Jayashree. That brings us to the end of our conversation. It was really insightful. If you could just leave our aspiring writers in the call with, advice, just advice from you about writing, publishing, editing, being in this world, whatever you'd like to, share.
um I've already said this before. I think my key thing is that, yes, keep writing, but keep reading. Reading and writing goes hand in hand. I know a lot of writers who don't read other people's work. That may work for them, but I think for me, especially as literary translators, read in all the languages you know how to read, not just in one English or whichever language. it increases your vocabulary, it increases your knowledge of how different people use language, or different authors, how they play around with language or how they don't play around with language. It allows you so much more of, it just allows you so much more an understanding of how language behaves. I mean, each individual language, how it behaves, etc. So the more the reading and writing definitely goes hand in hand. And in terms of writing, the only way to get to a point, and that if that point is a publication, if that point is to finish a book, the only way to get there is to actually sit your bum down on a chair and write, because otherwise you're not going to get there. It doesn't matter about the quality, because every writer will look back at what they've written and then say, that's not good enough, I need to be better. Quality will come with time. Quality might come right at the beginning. We don't know. We all are different people. But write and read. It's as simple as that.
Uh, Thank you so much, Jayashree. That really, that kind of summarizes our entire first draft club. Sit your bum down and write. So,
Yeah, yeah,
yes. Thank you
yeah.
so much for your time.